Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and I have a special guest today. This is Benjamin Hardy, who is not only an epic writer, but he is my nephew. So I am extra blessed to have him on my channel and to do this interview with him because his book that he just launched this week is called Personality Isn't Permanent. So I'm not going to go into all the amazing things about you, Ben, because I know that people will see that when we start talking. And besides that, I would start gushing like an auntie, and and it would be all true and wonderful, but maybe a little embarrassing for you. So I am so excited about this newest book that you have just released. I know you've been working on it for a super long time, and the science and everything that you put into the research on this book is absolutely brilliant. So let's just start. I'm going to first just ask you a question, and then let's just dive into this because I think this is really relevant information for where we are in these times. So why are personality tests like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram unscientific and harmful?
So this was something, so this is something that surprised me when I was going through my PhD program. And by the way, when I was an undergrad, and I actually tell this story in the book, but when I was an undergrad, I took one of those personality tests. I actually took the color code, which is a super popular test. And the score that I got on that test literally almost led my wife to not marry me because she was so worried. You know, I got a white on the color code, which meant that I'm like passive and aloof and that I don't achieve goals and stuff like that. And her parents were like, Lauren, you need to marry a real man. You don't marry a white, so those tests obviously can really lead to stereotypes, which is an interesting conversation given all the stuff on racism. But what I was surprised by when I was going through my PhD program was that all of those type-based personality tests are not good science. First off, they're like structurally very poorly designed. Secondly, though, they're not actually measuring personality, like as a psychologist would measure personality. What they do is they give you a label. And one of the reasons for this is because there's literally no such thing as a personality type. Personality can't just be stuck into a box. Like that's assuming that you are just the same person in every situation, which is totally false. But what these tests do, aside from being junk science, is that they lead to a label. They lead to a label which then limits your mindset. And there's a lot of research, for example, from Ellen Langer, who's at Harvard, who has studied mindfulness for 40 years. And mindfulness is incredibly important. You have to be mindful to be aware of the situation, to be adaptive. And what happens with overly assuming a label in your identity is that you become mindless to all the times the label is not true. You then actually start trying to defend the label because anything that's a part of your identity, you try to defend from criticism. And then one of the other major problems with these types of tests is that they lead to viewing your future self the same way you view your current self. Because when you're so definitive about who you are today with your label and just how you describe yourself, then it stunts your imagination towards becoming your desired future self or to becoming someone different. You imagine your future self being the exact same person you are today, which, your story shapes how you behave. So it really limits you. So there's a lot of baggage with these types of tests, and they should absolutely not be taken seriously. And I'm speaking that as an organizational psychologist.
Yeah, I mean, this is not just something you're saying to
No,
put
no,
an
no, no.
idea out to the universe. In fact, I can't honestly imagine you not being married to Lauren, being part of your, being part of your family.
Well, we have 5 kids now and a 6th on the way, right?
Right, it's like you guys are the perfect match in every way. And I think that there's a lot of people who will follow a test like that and they'll miss out on opportunities that could change the trajectory of their life because of what some stupid test said or I mean, the thing is, the bottom line, in my opinion, there's a lot of money in these tests. And
the $2 billion industry.
Yeah, so you're poking a big bear.
No, it's true. And,
Yeah.
it's super important for people to realize that identity and personality are 2 separate subjects. Identity is how you explain yourself. Like it's how you see yourself and it's how you describe yourself. Identity is actually way more important than personality. And what these tests do is they give you a sense of identity. And that's actually why people like them, is because if you haven't taken the time to do a lot of meditation, journaling, reflecting, and goal achievement, then you maybe aren't that clear on who you are as a person. And so these tests can kind of give you a fast food identity, which becomes your story. But then that becomes the thing, your identity predicts your behavior, because how you see yourself and the story you tell about yourself guides what you do. We're very consistent with the stories we tell. So if I were to tell you I'm an introvert, I'll probably want to be consistent with that story. So your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. And so you need to be really aware of the story you tell about yourself, and you can be very strategic about it as well. But these tests lead to a very fixed mindset about who you are and what you can do.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because I know that people do love these tests, and I've been caught in a couple of personality test traps over the years, and I know that even platforms, social media platforms, have pulled them off of Facebook, or pulled them off their platforms because people were giving away all kinds of information just for a stupid personality test. I mean, they were giving up personal information. So
Yeah.
we want someone
Facebook doesn't allow them anymore on the platform.
yeah, and I think that's great, first of all. But like I said, I've been caught in that trap too. I mean, I think it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, that's totally me," and "Oh yeah, it's nice to have someone tell you who you are if you really
Totally.
have not done any reflection." I actually really love that. Okay, so let's go.
What's really interesting, I'm going to just grab one more thought.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
actually wrote an article on this subject on Psychology Today, literally this week, because there was an article written on Forbes by someone who works for Myers-Briggs. And I
Ah,
actually literally wrote an article referencing it and like basically challenging it because basically the writer, who's like a top end person for that company, was kind of trying to explain why it feels like a contradiction, because there's so much research coming out now that talks about how personality changes over time and that you can consistently and proactively shape your personality in desired ways. And so the argument of the article, or the article, was saying basically that yes, we know that personality changes over time, and in fact you should grow as a person. You shouldn't stop, you should keep developing skills and abilities and things like that. But they said personality changes, but personality type does not. And they said your personality type is who is your core aspects that just absolutely can't change. And the problem with that article, and I explain it in mine, kind of breaking it down, is that like there's literally no evidence for personality types. That's a very bad way of looking at personality, but also there was no science behind anything that they were saying. They were just kind of saying like, yes, personality changes, but our theory that was made up by people who weren't psychologists is something we should follow. I mean, it's very just, I don't know. It's kind of just interesting. Like it's just not the right way to do it.
no, it's completely interesting. In fact, it made me think about when you have a dramatic experience, um, whether that be, and trauma is not, that can be a dramatic experience, but I'm talking about something that expands your mind, like a one moment experience.
Like a
And I've
aha peak experience of sorts, like a
Yes,
peak experience.
exactly. And what happens immediately in that moment, and I've experienced this several times, is I am a completely different person. My personality changes in that experience. I walk out of it and I'm completely different. So when you put yourself in what I found in these situations where you have this peak experience, you're different. You are a
It's because
complete,
it changes your identity. That's
it's
what peak
totally,
experiences do.
exactly.
It expands you as a person. It allows you to not be so clung to what you used to be, and then you become more flexible and you've got different perspectives. And so then you alter your behavior. I think people need peak experiences all the time so they
Yeah.
can hopefully have ahas about better ways of living, and also have a more higher level perspective of what's possible. Peak experiences create confidence, and confidence creates a higher level mindset for what's possible. So
Yeah.
I love the quote, and I know you love the quote too, that a mind stretched by a new idea can never go back, right?
Yeah, I do love
Because it
that.
stretches your identity and allows you to not be so like small in how you see yourself and small in how you see the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've walked literally out of an event or something that was a peak experience and felt like a different person. Like I looked at the world literally, it looked new. And you can't describe it unless you experience these things. So if anything I can put out there to anyone that's watching this, if you've not experienced something that is peak, that shifts your identity and shifts your view of the world, I would suggest that you search for something like that, and grab a friend if you need to. If it's doing it by yourself doesn't sound great, but yeah, I love that.
Well, in the book, yeah, go ahead.
No, and I think you're right. Once you stretch your mind, it's like letting the monkey out of the box. You'll never get the monkey back in, and that can be a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I talk a lot about how to create peak experiences. Like, there's a lot of research. So, like, so there's a guy named Colin Wilson. He was a former philosopher, but there's also a lot of just research on the subject of peak experiences. And one of the things that people say is that depression is the byproduct of apathy in many ways. Like just by not doing anything. Like if you just sit and watch, for example, like junk media or, like that all day, and you're not doing anything, you're not actually moving forward towards goals, you're being apathetic, that's going to create depression. So like the only way to create peak experiences regularly, because for most people who are not actively pursuing, like, let's just say a future version of themselves or pursuing big goals, therefore stepping out of their comfort zone, being in new environments and things like that, for people who aren't actively growing, they're not going to have as many peak experiences, because peak experiences literally require intention, and they require being outside of your typical sphere. Like your comfort zone and your personality are very basically the exact same thing. Like comfort zone is what's comfortable, it's what's safe, it's what you're used to doing, it's what's predictable, it's what's stable. So you go outside your comfort zone and you're then dealing with uncertainty. And although that can be difficult emotionally, that's where you become more flexible as a person, and that's where you have mind expanding experiences. And so that's it's like in neuroscience, they call it prediction errors. So like our brain forms memory so that we can predict our behavior. But when you step outside your comfort zone, when you're trying something new and you're actively pursuing goals and experiences beyond your current situation, then you experience what are called prediction errors, which is where you incorrectly predict what will happen. So like if a toddler touches a hot stove, they incorrectly predicted what would happen, right? And that's where the most amazing memories are formed. Yes, it hurt, but they did it, they incorrectly predicted it, and they then have a more expanded view of the world so that they can navigate the world better. And people, as they age, they become less open to new experiences. They become less willing to go through deep learning experiences. Like my two twins, 18 months old, like right before COVID, we started them into swimming lessons. And when you first put these two girls who are like just barely over a year old, who can't even talk, into the pool, they hate it. They're crying. Like if they're scared trying to go underwater, fast forward 4 months, they're brilliant swimmers. They're jumping in and stuff like that. But as adults, how often are you willing to go through such deep learning? And that's where the peak experiences are. That's where what we call psychological flexibility and adaptability comes in. But people typically, as they age, they stop. And there's that myth that people learn less effective than children as they age. It's just not true. It's just that they're not undergoing such transformational learning experiences. And so they're limiting their peak experiences and growth.
Yeah, I mean, so how do you help people realize that on the other side of fear is really just brilliance? I mean, fear is such an interesting thing to me, because we hold ourselves back because of fear of the unknown, and we want to stay in our comfort zone. I know so many people who don't want to do anything different than what they're already doing. And that circle of people that I know that feel that way and live their life that way is actually getting smaller, because I find I have to separate from people like that so that I can, because it keeps me stuck. So
yeah, I mean, the mindsets of the people around you, like one of the biggest predictors of personality, to be honest with you, and you already know this, is your peer group. Environment is one of the biggest things. Not only like, because there's that quote from Zig Ziglar. He said, your input shapes your outlook, and your outlook shapes your output. And there's a lot of research showing that the people you surround yourself with, like literally in high school and stuff like that, but even as adults, the people you're around predict whether you're going to be a drug addict or an alcoholic. They predict whether you're going to be an entrepreneur, whether you're going to be financially successful, whether you're going to be depressed. And so obviously being very thoughtful about your environment is going to determine the way you show up, and they're going to determine your identity and ultimately your personality. So you and I, it's interesting as you watch, as your peer group evolves and changes, because you stop resonating with just the typical way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's actually really awesome to be able to separate without any hardcore,
no judgment,
emotion or judgment. Yeah,
or even preaching. It's just like, you just move forward.
Yeah, the preaching part, trust me, I've done that a little bit in the past. It's been a long time, probably 20 years or more, where I used to try to get someone to, when I had a mind expanding experience, I used to try to pull someone in and say, you've got to check this out. And there was a bit of preaching that would happen, and it never works until people are really ready. Like most people, but you and I have had a lot of really cool, deep conversations over the years, which has been like this huge blessing in my life, because, here we are, auntie and nephew, and it's like, you're so young and so full of wisdom and so full of this there's something deep inside you that makes you a constant learner, which changes your perspective of everything, which
it expands you.
I love it. Okay, so let's go to this next question. This one's awesome. Why is it important to understand that your former, current, and future selves are totally different people? I love this question.
It's essential to understanding personality. So there's a Harvard psychologist. His name is Dr. Daniel Gilbert. He actually gave a TED talk, brilliant. It's 6 minutes long, a 6 minute long TED talk, but it's brilliant. It's called The Psychology of Your Future Self. And there's an enormous amount of research on this subject at this point in time, growing bodies of research as far as like that you need a clear future self in order to actually make quality decisions in the present. Because if you don't have a clear future self, then who cares what you do today? You also need that in order to engage in practice and like learning and stuff like that. But what Daniel Gilbert has found, and he's spent a lot of time studying how people view their former self and how people view their future self, is that he'll ask people, and he's literally done this for a long time. He'll ask people, do you think that you're the exact same person you were 10 years ago? And almost everyone says no. Like if you look back on where you were 10 years ago, you can see that your decision-making was a little different. You made decisions back then that you would no longer make today. Your perspectives are different. Your priorities are different. Your habits are different. Maybe even a lot of your environment and relationships are different. It's easy for many people, especially those who are growth oriented, to notice that they're a different person than they were 5, 10 years ago, maybe even 2 or 3, if you're like a massive growth expanding person. And so it's really healthy to view your former self as a different person rather than assuming that you're the same person. And especially if you've gone through traumatic experiences or things like that, to have an enormous amount of empathy and compassion towards your former self, but to recognize that you actually now are a different person, that you see the world differently, that you're making decisions differently, and that you don't need to be that same person. And so like that's crucial. And I think that's really easy for people to notice. But what Daniel Gilbert has found in his research is that even when people have noticed big change from their current to their former self, that they're a different person than they were in the past, as a rule, most people under predict how much their future self is going to be different. They actually think that who they are in the future is pretty much going to be the same as who they are today. Like that's just a common way for people to look at it, because people think that who they are right now is generally who they're going to always be. So there's a quote that Daniel Gilbert says. He says, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. We think that who we are right now is the person we're always going to be. And he says there's a reason for this. He says the reason is that very few people spend much time imagining their future self. We spend way more time remembering our past. And also, Dr. Carol Dweck, who coined the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset, what she found is that people with a fixed mindset, people who don't believe they're going to change very much, they're completely defined by who they are today. So like Dr. Dweck, she gave students like tests and things like that, like tests way above their skill level, like let's just say 3rd or 4th graders. And she gave them a challenge to basically, and it was way above them all. She knew they were all going to fail. She just wanted to see how they would respond. And the people with the fixed mindset, they defined themselves by that failure. They said, I'm dumb. I can't learn beyond this. Like they kind of gave up, and they were fully defined by where they were right now. And what Carol Dweck says is they were stuck in the tyranny of now. Whereas the growth mindset people, they didn't really care who they were today. They all failed, but they were more interested in what was possible. They believed that they could still learn and grow. And so that's kind of a crucial concept, is that who you are today really doesn't matter that much. It's very temporary, that your future self will be a different person. And that's what the research shows. Like there's a psychologist named Hal Hershfield. He's at UCLA, and he says it's very crucial to view your future self as a different person. Think about it. In 2 or 3 years from now, you might have had tons of peak experiences. You might have learned a lot and done all sorts of things. You might be in a totally different place. You might have even gone through some crazy traumas. Who knows? In 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to see the world differently. You're going to have different priorities and perspectives, and you're going to make different decisions because of what you know and because of where the world is, because of the context. And so you should view your future self differently. And if you do that, you can then make decisions based on who that future self is. So back to, Daniel Gilbert, the first thing you need to do is imagine who your future self is. And you need to then take the time to conceptualize that so that then you can go through a process of actively chasing it. And as you actively chase that, you're going to have a lot of peak experiences. You're going to grow beyond your current comfort zone. You're going to become more flexible as a person, and you're going to expand what's possible for you. So, you need to actually imagine it first, and then you need to make it part of your daily process. Because most people, when they start the day, they don't imagine their future self. They're not doing like a morning routine journaling process where they activate their future self and then intentionally take courageous actions toward that. Instead, most people, they become a product of their environment, and they're on autopilot, living subconsciously, which is basically just living according to their current situation versus living according to their future situation.
Yeah, I think that's really pretty powerful, because I do think people believe that how they are now, especially as they get older, is
who they're going to always be.
Is who they're going to be. And
it's the worst mindset you can have.
I know. And I have to tell you, every single time I do a workout, which I am a workout person, and you know that about me, I used to own a
I
gym,
love that about you.
and it's
I just had
something,
an amazing workout, by the way. I'm feeling great.
you know what, I did too, right before we got on. I'm like, okay. I know last time we talked, we were on a Zoom call too, and I showed you my muscles, like, check it out. And you're like,
She's getting
woo.
buff, by the way, people. She's getting buff. Yeah.
Anyway, the reason, one of the reasons that I do this and I get up and I push myself through discomfort is because I see myself in the future as, you know, I'm a year away from 60, and a year away
So
from
brilliant.
and a year away from 70. I picture myself, how am I going to feel? How am I going to feel in my human body? And so every decision I make, whether that's a workout, a meal I put in my body, whatever it is that I'm doing today, I'm envisioning how my life is going to look in this physical body 10 years from now. Like, I've been doing that for a long time, since I really started getting a little bit older. Probably when I was about 40, I started realizing, wow, a lot of people my age are like, whoa, they're so unhealthy. And so I do think that that's one of the most powerful things about personality that we need to realize, is that when you envision your future, it should make a difference in the decisions that you make now, because hopefully you're going to be a different, better, more vibrant person in the future.
And you could be, and you absolutely,
Yeah.
here's what's crazy, Jane. And I love everything you're saying. So one of the core concepts in psychology, and what you're saying is crazy for a few reasons. So what Daniel Gilbert found is that often people's future selves are frustrated at their former selves. Like, if you're super out of shape, and like, you know, then you're frustrated at the decisions of your former self. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if you envision your future self, then you're going to be very proud of your former self for the decisions you made, because you were making decisions in the present based on the future circumstances you wanted. I mean, when I first got into my PhD program back in 2015, like, my future self was a professional writer. I was writing big books, and now I'm doing that because when you imagine a future self, you can then go through a daily process of creating that. You can actually like do important stuff versus all the urgent stuff. And throughout your day, you can actually create a future. But why this is super important is this. One of the most dominant findings in psychology is that the best way to predict a person's future behavior is by looking at the past. And a lot of people assume that the reason for that is because people's personality is innate and fixed, which is completely junk. That's not true. There's other reasons why people are not actively creating the future. So for the majority of people, the best way to predict their future is literally by looking at the past. But if you actually imagine and choose a future self and then actively chase that, then the best way to predict your current behavior is by looking at your future. And that's the goal, is that the future is the thing guiding your daily behavior, not the past. But the reason that people's past is so much shaping who they are is a few things. One of them being unresolved trauma, which keeps them in a loop. One of them being their identity narrative, their story about themselves, which is so focused on the present, like I've talked about. And that's why labels and things like that can be negative, because ultimately they create a fixed mindset where you're so obsessed with the current self that you don't imagine a future self that's different. And so the key element of all of this is that you actually hold your current self more loosely, like what people with a growth mindset. People with a growth mindset, they genuinely don't care that much about who they are because they know their future self is far more important. And then obviously having an environment. People get stuck in roles and repetitions, which then lead them to acting consistently over time. And so if you're consistently upgrading your environment, if you're consistently putting yourself in new situations and taking on new roles, of course you're going to expand as a person. Of course you're going to not get so stuck and repetitive. So the goal is that your future self, the person you genuinely want to be, is the thing guiding and predicting your daily behavior, the thing deciding what you do today, rather than your past or your story or some negative event from the past, or just because you're in an environment that keeps you stuck. The goal is that your future self is the thing driving your behavior. And if you do that, you're going to make huge, massive progress over a very short period of time.
It actually kind of goes along with Jack Canfield's concept of acting as if. Mm-hmm. It can be that.
It's like be, do, have.
Yeah.
You design your future self and you use that as the basis for your identity. Right. And your identity is so crucial because very few people are active about their identity. But if you imagine your future self, then you can be that person now, do what that person would do today, and you can create and have what your future self would have. It could then become your new normal. Yeah. Because as you engage in activities and behaviors towards your future self at a subconscious level, it's going to actually set in, and that's going to become your new norm.
Yeah,
It's
I
just going to
really
be who
love
you
that.
are.
Yeah, to me, it's so simple to see. And I
It's
think
simple.
when you explain it like that, it's like, yeah, that makes so much sense.
Well, you've experienced it. I've experienced it. I guarantee lots of people who
Yeah,
have watched this have experienced it at certain levels, but you always want to be in a place where you're doing this. Like, no
I
matter what you've achieved
agree.
in the past, you always want to be in a state of deciding a future self that, and that's what Viktor Frankl found. Viktor
Yeah.
Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he said, without a clear sense of purpose for your future, the present loses all sense of meaning. And as a result, you either distract yourself or you just are completely apathetic and depressed. You need a future self that gives you a sense of purpose. And what's
And it
cool
goes
about
beyond hope, right? It goes beyond hope. It's not just
well,
hope.
hope is part of it. Hope is
Yeah,
powerful.
it
And
is.
hope is what people
Yeah,
need, but hope and purpose are connected to each other. You
right.
need hope, but what's cool about what Frankl said, what he said is that what man needs is not a tensionless state. What a lot of people want is they want a tensionless state where they're just chilling. He says, no, that's the opposite of what you need. That's what's going to actually ruin your brain. That's why when people like retire and they lose a sense of purpose, they die. What he says is that what man needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. And that's what's so cool is that your purpose and your future self is not something you discover. That's actually one of the biggest myths of personality, is that your personality is what you discover. It's not. It's what you choose. It's a freely chosen task. It's the purpose that you want to create. And then you make choices. We all can make choices, but the problem is that people want to limit their ability to make choices.
Yeah, and some of it's, do you think it's just laziness? Because we talked about being in the comfort zone. It's just like, well, and I think if they've done personality tests that they're totally wrapped into, I saw a little review that someone just did on your new book, that he was totally bummed because he'd read the color code several times. And he was like, I guess I got to throw this out because
But he was kind of happy at the same time because it
he was.
liberated him. It liberated him from his self-limiting beliefs
I know.
and his identity. It
Yeah.
liberated him from an identity that was so stuck in his past.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so awesome. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. How does trauma negatively impact your personality and limit your future? That's a big one.
Yeah, this is actually why I wrote the book, Jane, is I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which I know you've read. It's a deep, dense book. It's basically at this point, the definitive book on trauma. I was reading that book because in 2018, I wrote this book, Willpower Doesn't Work, which has a lot to do with addiction. And so I was very interested in how trauma leads people into addiction. But when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, the thing that blew my mind was how much trauma, and by the way, trauma is any event that negatively, it's a negative emotional event. It could be big, like what most people think of trauma, like going to war or being sexually abused. Like there's big traumas, which obviously have a big negative impact on our identity. But trauma could be something as small as being told you're bad at math. Like there's actually a lot of research on what's called math trauma. And so it's just any negative emotional experience that leads you to viewing your identity in a very limiting way, where you ultimately create a fixed mindset about yourself. Basically what the book Body Keeps the Score says, and this is by Bessel van der Kolk, he says that trauma, it freezes your personality. It leads you to being really stuck in the past. It shatters your hope and imagination towards the future. And again, you need to imagine your future self, and you need to have hope and flexibility to start learning. But trauma can really stunt that. And the reason for that is that when it comes to emotional experiences, and we all have emotional experiences, we all have ups and down days, we all have things that happen to us. But when you have an emotional experience, there's the initial reaction, and we all have initial reactions. If someone cuts you off on the road, you're going to have a reaction. But what happens is that when you have an event that gives you a negative reaction, like just as an example, in the book, I tell the story of a family member of mine who's brilliant. She's this amazing lady in her 80s, but she had a bad experience. So I met her at a family reunion, and we just got talking. And she told me that, like, after talking to her, I found out that she loved writing and that she'd always wanted to write kids' books. And I was like, that's amazing. Do you have any kids' books? And she said, no, I don't. I've never written any. I said, why? She said, well, I'm not good at drawing. And so I've just never decided to do it. I'm like, what do you mean you're not good at drawing? And then she immediately told me a story of what happened 40 years ago. And like literally that was where her mind went, was she told me about the memory of 40 years ago. She was in a private art lesson when she was in her early 40s. She took a private art lesson, and there was like 6 other students in the class, and they were doing one exercise, and the teacher walked up to her easel pad and corrected her and was marking off and spent like 30 to 60 seconds correcting her. And during those 30 to 60 seconds, this person of mine, this family member, she was deeply embarrassed because there was all the students were watching her. She was wondering like, why didn't this teacher correct everyone else like that? And so in her mind, during this emotional experience, a thought formed in her head, a narrative. We call it a cognitive commitment, but basically the narrative was, I'm not good at drawing. And so she never did it again. And so over those years, she have formed the identity that she can't draw. And so as a result, she was non-flexible and had no growth mindset. She was defined by that event. But here's what's key about trauma. Trauma is a meaning that you give to an experience. So she didn't actually have to give the meaning to that feeling that I'm bad at drawing. She could have given it any set of meanings. She could have said, wow, this teacher's really investing in me. He's not actually correcting anyone else. But she didn't choose to give it a good meaning. And giving things good meanings is difficult. It's a skill. It's called emotional regulation. And, I know that you've got your rage journal and stuff where when you're feeling stuff, you then journal about it and you think about it and you have conversations about it so that ultimately you can choose to frame it in a positive way. But she didn't do that. And that's what happens with trauma is you have a negative experience and you then become defined by the emotions of it and the identity that's formed through that rather than choosing a better meaning. And so you ultimately get stuck in the past. But the cool part is this. You can go back and you can reframe the meanings of any experience. We actually do it all the time. Our memory is very fluid. And so the key is just choosing to view the past from a much better, healthier perspective, which we all can do.
I love that you said that our memories are fluid because
our memories are meanings, they're stories, but they are very fluid, very fluid.
Well, and honestly, I've read your new book, and that story always struck me so powerfully because you take this person who had this deep desire to write children's books, and here she is now in her 80s, and something that happened 40 years ago that was one nugget and moment in time completely changed the trajectory of her life. And it's not saying she's had a bad life. She's had a great
life, but in that area, she's got an extremely fixed mindset and didn't do something that would have brought her so much joy and satisfaction. And the truth is, again, there's so much research on the idea that if you have a future self that you're specific about, you actually need that to engage in what psychologists call deliberate practice. So Malcolm Gladwell called it the 10,000 hour rule. He said, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you can develop expertise. There's some truth to that, but you could do something for 10,000 hours and not get any better at it. The real idea is actually called deliberate practice. And what deliberate practice means is that you're actually going through a process. You're getting coaching, you're getting training. It's kind of like my girls going swimming. Like they got a lot of specific coaching and training. We hired someone to teach our girls how to swim. So they weren't just in the pool, just chilling. Like they were going through exercise that was very difficult. But the future self that we had for our kids is that they could swim so that they didn't drown, And so like if she had a future version of herself that could draw and illustrate and do all the things that she wanted to do, and she then went through a deep process of getting coaching, going through the ups and downs and learning over 40 years, of course she could have become a brilliant artist. She could have, she could have produced. I mean, as for myself, it's not like I had any natural skills to be a writer. I've just filled hundreds of journals and I've gone through a lot of deliberate practice to become a good writer. And I still have a lot of chinks in my armor as a writer. I've still got so much to learn, but I'm practicing and I've got a future self that's where I want to be. And so she just gave up on that. And often trauma can do that. A negative experience can lead to just forming in a narrative that I can't do this. And so therefore you then develop a fixed mindset. You stop having a future self. And there's a crazy quote from a guy named Robert Brault. He said, we're kept from our goals, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. And so what happens is rather than going through the obstacles to achieve your goal, instead you just take a clear path to something lesser. You form a lesser identity of yourself that you can't do it. And as a result, you choose something lesser. And that happens in all areas of our life, whether it be our fitness, whether it be our relationships, whether it be our finances. Rather than going through the obstacles by getting help and going through the ups and downs of learning and continuing that deliberate practice process of becoming our future self, we just choose an easier path. Because from a motivational standpoint, we all need goals and we all need a path to those goals in order to be motivated. And so we just choose the easier path.
Well, I also think it's pretty important to note that we care too much about what other people think of us, which takes us to the path of least resistance, or it keeps us stuck because we don't want anyone to think bad about us. Like this relative of yours, she was afraid of what the other kids were, or the other people in the class were thinking about her.
Yep.
And so I think that I've always prided myself in being an outlier. Like
you are.
Yeah, and I don't want to
You
be.
get to choose to be.
Yeah, and it's actually,
You're choosing
yeah,
actively to do things different.
yeah, and it's such a, once you step outside of what everyone is doing and what everyone else thinks about you, you are able to reframe
There's a lot of
traumatic
freedom.
moments really quickly, because I know listening to that story, that traumatic moment was just simply an art teacher correcting, and like it's such a like I would look at that, like that wouldn't be traumatic to me, but I think
Yeah.
a lot of people can relate to this because it is not
Well, we
some.
all have events like this
Oh, I
that
totally
shape how
agree.
we see the world,
No,
whether
I
big or
agree.
small.
That's why I think it's so powerful. In fact, one of the things, one of the most brilliant conversations that you and I have had these last couple of years is when we were talking about the trauma I had when my husband lost his job. And
Big
you
trauma. And
were
by
like,
the way, that story is completely in the book. Anyone who gets this, like, I think it's chapter 6 on subconscious. There's like 10 or 12 pages on that story on your leg. But go ahead and tell them.
yeah, no, I mean, to me, if I would have had this concept of reframing that trauma differently, it would have saved me about 5 years of physical pain.
I know you went
And
through a lot of deep physical pain.
I did, and it was debilitating for a person who's active, and it was all caused by the emotional trauma of my husband losing his job.
It was
And
it was suppressed emotions and the
right,
anger and the narrative that formed both about yourself and about your husband that came
right,
from the negative emotions, your initial reaction
exactly.
rather than your chosen perspective, right?
Yeah, and I'm honored and grateful that you would put this in there, because I do think it's
It's a
powerful.
brilliant story. It's super important for people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that if we can take these things, because I know that there's a lot of physical pain that comes along with these emotional traumas that are just part of our everyday life. Like,
Yes.
he's not the
Yes.
only person that
The
lost his
body
job.
keeps the score, right?
Totally. And I love that book too. I've read it a couple times. All right, let's go. Let's get on this.
One last just quick thought on
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to actively get better meanings. So like there's actually a quote from Gandhi. It's attributed to Gandhi, but he said that I cried when I had no shoes until I saw the person who had no feet.
Yeah.
And so like basically the idea is that having no shoes is a meaning. It's not objective. He was crying from because he was focusing on like the negatives, and then he saw a different perspective. He was like, wow, maybe this isn't that big a deal. That's a aha peak experience, right? He's like, okay, so now the idea or the meaning of having no shoes isn't that bad. Well, to actually choose a better meaning from a former experience, you often have to get more context. So context is the thing that shapes the meaning. And so like, just as an example, like when COVID-19 started, I actually sent an email to my email list, and I wasn't really thinking because but I used the word viral. I used the word viral. And this was like back in like March or April, like when it was all hot and crazy. And I had like 50 people email me and just said, Ben, please don't use that word right now. It's very insensitive, like viral. You know what I mean? And I was like, totally, no worries, no worries. Had I used that word like 3 or 4 months before, though, no one would have even noticed, because the meaning of the content is shaped by the context. Context shapes the meaning of what's happening. And so that's the same thing with the no shoes thing. The context shapes the meaning of the content. And so when you're wanting to change the meaning of a former experience, often you need to get different context, different perspectives. One of the things that my relative could have done, and one of the normal aspects of traumas, is that it's buried. You don't get more context. Instead, you just bury it because the emotions hurt too much. You form that cognitive commitment, and it impacts your identity. And your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. So she never developed the personality as someone who could be an amazing artist because of her limiting identity, because of that experience, which is based on the meaning she gave to one event. Now, if she wanted to change the meaning of that event, Viktor Frankl talks a lot about how emotions cease to be suffering when you give them a clear picture. This is why journaling is so beautiful, because when you journal about your experience, you can then look at it as a story, and you can start to think about it from different angles. Journaling is one powerful way of getting the emotions out of you and looking at them from different perspectives, and ultimately choosing how you want to feel about it, choosing the meaning you give to it, choosing how you want to see it. The goal is that you actually look at any event from your past as, this happened for me, not to me. She could have viewed it that way. She could have said, wow, this, as much as it hurt, it was emotional. I actually needed this because I'm serious about becoming an artist. And so I need to have these types of experiences. It happened. She could have saw it as it happened for me. Journaling would have been one way. Having conversations with people who encouraged her could have helped her to say, maybe that teacher wasn't meaning wrong. Maybe he actually thinks you're good. And then she might have even had a conversation with that teacher. getting more context. And maybe he would have said, I think you're doing amazing. I was just trying to help. And then she could have ultimately, with that broadened perspective, said, I'm going to choose to view this as a positive experience because I'm committed to my goal. And ultimately, as people, we need to look at our past and ultimately choose the meanings that will support our future rather than the meanings that will limit our identity and stop our future from existing.
Yeah, because what we do is we take that painful moment and we internalize it, and we bury it. Like we just, like I can almost sometimes feel like what your relative felt just by
Totally.
you describing it, because it's like, instead of trying to explore, because there might be the potential for more hurt, right?
Yep.
It's like, let's just take that nugget of pain that just felt like a stab in my heart and let's just bury it and move on. And we'll never have to visit that again because that's too painful. And I'm just going to move on to something different. Yeah. Like to me,
So,
that's a powerful story in there, Ben. I
so
really
here's the
love
last
it.
thought on this. And
Okay.
this is mind blowing. If your listeners can get this, it changes everything. So this is a quote from Dr. Brent Slife. He is one of the most amazing psychologists. This comes from his book called Time and Psychological Explanation. He explains how time works psychologically. And usually what most people think is that the past is what's determining who you are in the present. Past events are what determine me to be who I am. But the actual truth is the exact opposite from a memory perspective. So this is what he says. This is a literal quote from his book, and I stuck it in my book, but he says this. He says, we reinterpret or reconstruct our memory in light of what our mental set is in the present. In this sense, it's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than it is to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. And so basically what this means is that we are actively choosing the meaning of our past. And you can actually see how this works again in real time. Like in the present, the word viral means something different than it used to, you know? And we're actually, you know, obviously going through this whole racial thing, and we're choosing to look at the past differently because of where we're at in the present. And so our past is flexible. It's a meaning that we're constantly reconstructing, and we get to choose the meanings of our former experiences, which means we're not stuck in our past, and that our memory is constantly growing, and that we actually get to choose how we view our past. This is why you get to rewrite your story. And there's a lot of powerful people who do this, powerful people who have gone through such painful, traumatic experiences that almost led them to suicide. And then ultimately they were able to reframe those experiences that this is the best thing that could have happened to me. This is something that happened for me, and it gives me a lot of purpose for my future. And so we have to choose to reframe our negative experiences into a positive story that propels ourselves forward. And we can do it. Anything that's happened in your past can be happening for you. And I can speak with authority, you know, like my parents divorced. My dad was a drug addict. I mean, I had a crazy childhood, but I, from my current perspective, say that that was the absolute best thing that could have happened to me, because it's so much helping me in my future, and it gives me a huge sense of purpose. And it's taught me so many things. And so I get to view that and also view my former self with compassion, and also view my dad and his former self with compassion. He's not the same person he used to be. He's overcome those addictions. So I don't have to be angry at him or my former self. I can realize we're not the same people as we were in the past, and that happened for us so that we can have a bigger future.
It's amazing when it's reframed that way, because it changes everything. Cal, I love that so much, Ben. Okay, so one more. What are the most effective and science-based ways for making radical changes in your life? Because I think
Yeah.
that's the key. Okay, so let's give some tools.
So the basics, and we've already covered so much of them, is
Yeah.
one, reframing the past. That's obviously crucial, and I've just broken down lots of ways to do that. But also, it all really starts with imagination. Albert Einstein said, literally, imagination is more important than knowledge. So you need to actually take the time to imagine your future self, the person you want to be. You know, there's a lot of research that shows that the number one regret on people's deathbeds, and you already brought it up, is that
Yeah.
people didn't have the courage to be the person they wanted to be. Instead, they lived up to the expectations of those around them out of fear. And so step one, imagine your future self. Step two, and this is where it starts to require courage. And by the way, your future self is a draft. It's like drafting a book. You're never going to actually have that perfect future self. In the future, as you expand, you're going to actually imagine a different future self. But it's something that you have to actually think about. Where do you genuinely want to be in like 2 to 3 years from now? What do you want your circumstances to be like? What do you want your relationships to be like? What do you want your income? Like literally define your future characteristics and also your future circumstances. Then the next thing you would need to do, and this is where it would take some serious courage, because identity is based on the stories you tell about yourself. Rather than being so definitive in your current identity, you would actually want to start admitting and telling people about your future self, about the person you want to be. Because if you're going to actually become that person, then you can't hide it forever. So you might as well start telling people now that this is your goal. This is where you want to go. When you start telling people that, number one, it really hits your identity. You start to believe it more because you're telling people. You also start to create an environment of accountability where people expect you to start showing up in a different way. they also will support you in a different way. Some people will obviously maybe criticize you or something like that. But again, going back to the idea, what other people think about you is none of your business, right? Telling people about your goals is powerful because our behavior is often consistent with the stories we tell about ourselves. And so if you start telling people about your goal, you're going to start acting in a way on a daily basis towards that goal. And that's going to literally transform your identity. And it's going to create those peak experiences. Other things you could do is investing in your goal, investing in your future self. Investing money and investing time and knowledge and education is how you get super committed. A lot of research on the idea that commitment follows investment. And so like when I wanted to become a writer, I started investing big in that education. I bought online courses that taught me how to write viral articles. I invested in teachers and stuff like that so that I could quickly start getting millions and millions of views. You got to invest in your future self. Additionally, you've got to alter your environment, and remove the influences that would keep you stuck as your former self. And you need to, fill yourself with information and experiences and people that will guide you towards your future self. It's something we can all do. You just take small steps on a daily basis. Morning routines are another crucial one. Putting yourself in a frame of mind in the morning where you visualize your future self, you write about your goals, and ultimately you take action towards those goals in the beginning. That's how you build confidence. Just small steps every day. It's not like you have to freaking conquer the world in one day. Small steps every day over time create this huge compound effect. And you over time become that person. It becomes your new normal. These are things we can all do.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, this to me is going to
be... The future should guide our present, for sure, right?
Yeah, the future should guide our present, and instead of the past guiding our present.
And from Frankl's perspective, if you don't have a hope or perspective in your future, then the present is literally meaningless.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Ben, I think that
it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor.
Yeah, always. Like we're lucky because we get to chat all the time.
We have these fun conversations all the time. And by the way, everyone, Jane is one of the most amazing people in my life. Like when I'm having a bad day, I call her and she freaking cheers me up. I mean, I'm lucky enough that Jane's my aunt. And so I get to have, this person in my world who's helping me to, so love you, Jane. And also just love to anyone else who's listening to this.
Oh, thanks, Ben. I love you too. Like a ton. So Personality Isn't Permanent is out now. This is
out now. Personality Isn't Permanent with Penguin Random House.
Yeah. And this, you could go to Amazon.com. You can go to BenjaminHardy.com.
Yeah, wherever you want to buy the book. Amazon, a lot of people like audiobooks. The most amazing audiobook guy did my audiobook. He's done some of the most the biggest books. He actually is the guy who did The Body Keeps the Score. Audiobook's brilliant. If you like audiobooks, go on Audible. But if you prefer Kindle or just wherever you buy books, the book is there.
Yeah, so this is going to be a game changer for a lot of people. It couldn't come at a better time, in my opinion. If you are an Audible person, I know I am. You and I share a lot of books, Ben, and I'm like you. I listen to everything at either 1.5 or 1.7 speed.
It's beautiful.
And that's my brain just works that way. But I can't wait to listen to the Audible, even though
You're going to love it.
Yeah.
It's so well done.
It's awesome. So pick up this book, pick up a few copies for the people you love, because to me, just reading this book, the beautiful stories that are in it, the guidance that you're not fixed to a personality can absolutely literally change your life even 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 months from now. Like you are a fluid being who has the ability to mold your life in whatever you want.
Flexible and adaptable.
So amazing. So reach out for this book. I know that this will impact you so brilliantly in this future time that we're all looking for something more brilliant in our lives. And Ben, you and I tried to do this a couple times. I think we finally made it happen, which I'm so happy.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I love you tons. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.